I want to start today by asking you to just close your eyes for a second. Seriously, just try to imagine you are somewhere very, very specific.
A very high-stakes location.
Exactly. You are hundreds of feet beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, and it is 1942.
Right in the absolute height of the Second World War.
Yeah, and you are inside this steel tube. The air is, well, it's incredibly heavy. It is hot.
And it smells awful, I would imagine.
Completely. It smells like a mix of diesel fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the body odor of 50 or 60 men who just haven't showered in weeks. You are serving in the silent service.
Which is the nickname for the submarine force. And it is a very fitting name because silence was literally your only defense out there.
Right.
You are deep in enemy territory, you are hunting Japanese shipping, but you are also actively being hunted.
Because every creak of the hull could give you away.
Exactly. Every drop wrench, every loud footstep could be picked up by a destroyer on the surface.
So it is this incredibly high-pressure environment in every sense of the word. You have the physical pressure from the water outside and the psychological pressure from the enemy above.
Yeah, the tension must have been unbearable.
And now I want you to imagine that in the middle of all this, where you are miles and miles from the nearest friendly port, completely cut off from the outside world, a crisis starts to unfold.
A crisis that has absolutely nothing to do with the war.
Right, at least not directly. It is a medical crisis.
Which is the last thing you want on a submarine.
You have a shipmate, a young guy just like you, and he starts complaining of a stomach ache.
Which, at first you might just chalk up to the food. Submarine food wasn't exactly five-star dining.
Right, you think it's just indigestion. But then he collapses. He is in absolute agony. He's sweating. He's feverish.
And if you are the medic on board, you know exactly what this is.
Yeah.
You recognize the signs. It is acute appendicitis.
Now, if you get appendicitis today, it's basically just a Tuesday. You go to the ER, they knock you out, they make a few tiny holes, they snip it out.
And you are sitting at home watching Netflix in recovery a few hours later.
Exactly. But on a submarine in 1942.
It is a death sentence. And I want to be clear that that is not an exaggeration. If that appendix bursts, bacteria floods the abdominal cavity.
Right.
You get peritonitis.
Right.
You get sepsis. It is a slow, screaming, agonizing way to die.
And here is the massive problem. There is no doctor on board.
None at all.
There is no operating room. There are no scalpels. There is no anesthesia machine.
What they have is a 22-year-old kid named Wheeler Lipes.
Right.
A guy who used to work in a lab, and basically a drawer full of kitchen utensils.
It sounds like the setup for a bad joke, doesn't it? A guy walks into a submarine galley with a spoon.
It really does.
Yeah.
But what happened next is widely considered the very first major surgery ever performed on a submerged submarine.
So today on this deep dive, we are telling the incredible story of Wheeler Bryson Lipes. The crew called him Doc.
Even though he wasn't a doctor?
Right. We are going to unpack how a high school dropout with zero surgical training pulled off a literal medical miracle using bent spoons and a tea strainer.
And, perhaps even more surprisingly, we are going to explore why the Navy didn't celebrate him for it.
Yeah, that part is wild.
Instead of a medal, there was actually serious talk of a court-martial.
Talk about no good deed going unpunished.
It is a fascinating story. Our mission today is to look at the clash between rigid military bureaucracy and the kind of desperate, on-the-fly improvisation that saves lives.
It's about rule-breaking, ingenuity, and a justice that was delayed for an entire lifetime. So we are diving deep. Let's just start with the man himself. Who was Wheeler Lipes?
So, Wheeler Bryson Lipes, he was a Virginia boy, born in Newcastle on July 12, 1920.
Okay.
Now, to really understand Lipes, you have to understand the era he grew up in.
The Great Depression.
Exactly. Opportunities were incredibly scarce. If you were a young man in the 1930s, joining the military wasn't just about patriotic duty. It was a guaranteed job.
It was 3 square meals and a bed.
Right. So Lipes enlisted in the Navy in 1936.
Wait, let me just do the math on that. Born in 1920, enlisted in 1936. He was 16.
He was 16 years old.
Was that even allowed?
Technically, no. But practically speaking, it happened all the time back then. Recruiters often just looked the other way, or parents would sign waivers.
Where kids would just lie about their age.
Exactly. Lipes was eager. He just wanted to get out into the world. He actually served on the USS Texas first.
Which is a battleship, a massive floating city compared to a sub.
Yes. But his destiny was really in the smaller boats. So on December 10th, 1941.
Which is just 3 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Exactly. He joined the crew of the USS Sea Dragon.
The Sea Dragon, SS-194, that was a Sargo-class submarine, and his role on that boat was pharmacist's mate.
Right. And we really need to clarify this term because words change meaning over time.
Yeah, today a pharmacist is the person at the drugstore.
Exactly. When we hear pharmacist, we think of the person counting pulls behind a counter. But in the 1942 Navy, a pharmacist's mate was the entire medical department for a small vessel.
But he still wasn't a doctor.
Absolutely not. And that is the most critical point of this entire story. A pharmacist's mate is an enlisted rate. A doctor is a commissioned officer with a medical degree.
But he did have some training, right?
He did. He had been a hospital lab technician for 3 years.
So he knew how to use a microscope, he could identify blood types, things like that.
He could do all of that. He could set a broken bone, stitch up a cut, dispense aspirin. He treated dysentery, and very commonly in the Navy, he treated venereal diseases.
So he was basically a glorified paramedic and a nurse rolled into one.
Yes, but he had absolutely zero training in surgery.
He had never actually cut a person open.
Never. He had observed surgeries in the hospital while he was a lab tech. He had read medical textbooks. He was a very smart guy, very curious.
But watching and doing are two very different things.
Exactly. Watching a surgeon remove an appendix and doing it yourself is the difference between watching a pilot fly a jumbo jet and trying to land it yourself.
With no instructor in the seat next to you.
And no landing gear.
Right. So that sets up our protagonist. We have a 22-year-old kid who knows the medical theory but has never done the actual practice.
Which brings us to September 1942, the crisis.
So the Sea Dragon is on its 4th war patrol. They are deep in the Pacific.
The sources specifically note they were in enemy waters. This likely means they were patrolling the heavily guarded shipping lanes near Indochina or the Philippines.
Meaning that Japanese destroyers are just everywhere.
Yes. If they surface during the day, they are dead. If they use their radio to call for help, the Japanese can triangulate that signal and drop depth charges.
So they have to remain completely invisible. They are ghosts.
And while they're creeping along in the dark, one of the crew members, Darrell Dean Rector, starts feeling sick.
He was a seaman first class, just 19 years old.
And on a submarine, sickness spreads incredibly fast because of the recycled air in close quarters.
But this wasn't the flu.
No. Rector is complaining of severe abdominal pain, starts around the navel, which is typical, and then migrates to the lower right quadrant.
He loses his appetite.
He has a fever.
Yeah.
And his abdominal muscles get extremely rigid.
That's that classic sign called guarding, right?
Exactly. It's the body's involuntary reflex, trying to protect the inflamed organ underneath. Lipes examines him. He checks his white blood cell count.
Because he was a lab tech, he actually had the skills and the microscope to do that.
Yes, and the count comes back sky high.
Which means a massive infection.
Massive. Lipes knows it. The commanding officer, Captain Farrell, knows it. It is acute appendicitis.
And the clock is just ticking down now.
It is. Once that inflammation really takes hold, you have a very narrow window. Maybe 24 hours, maybe 48 if you are lucky.
And after that?
The organ dies. It becomes gangrenous, and then it bursts.
And if it bursts on a submarine with no heavy antibiotics,
there is no coming back from that. You cannot treat peritonitis with aspirin. Rector will die.
So Lipes goes to Captain Farrell, and they have to have this completely impossible conversation.
Lipes essentially says, Captain, he is going to die.
And the captain has to say, we cannot surface. We are thousands of miles from any kind of real help.
It is the ultimate command decision. Think about the burden on a captain. Do you risk the entire boat, all 60 men on board, by surfacing and radioing for help?
Or do you let one man die to save the rest of the crew?
The cold, utilitarian military calculation says you let him die.
That is brutal.
Military regulations actually explicitly covered this scenario. In the absence of a qualified surgeon, the pharmacist's mate is supposed to make the patient comfortable, administer morphine, and just wait.
Wait for him to die.
Yes, that was the official legal option.
But Lipes is only 22. He is looking at his friend. He's simply not ready to just sit there and watch him die.
And neither is Captain Farrell, honestly. Farrell asks Lipes, is there absolutely anything you can do?
And Lipes says, I can operate.
Imagine the sheer guts it took to say those words. I can operate, having never done it in his life.
Lipes was basically saying, look, I have watched doctors do it. I think I understand the mechanics of it, but everything is working against us.
So the captain decides to put the choice to Rector himself.
This is the part that really gets me. They go down to the sick bay, which is just a tiny little bunk.
And they lay it all out for the patient. They say, look, Daryl, Doc Lipes says he can try to cut it out, but he is not a surgeon. If he messes up, you die on the table. If we do nothing, you die anyway. It is your call.
And Rector says yes.
He told the captain, I trust Doc.
Wow. That bond between shipmates is just something else. He put his life entirely in the hands of a guy whose only medical qualification was a certificate in lab technology.
So the decision is made. And this brings us to the surgery itself. This is where the story shifts from dramatic to completely unbelievable.
Right. This is the ultimate MacGyver moment.
They have absolutely no operating room. Submarines are cramped. They're filled with pipes and machinery. Where do you even put a surgical patient?
They chose the wardroom.
Yes, that's the officer's dining area. It had the only table big enough for a man to lie on, which was the dining table.
But even that table was too short, right? They had to slide it out or extend it somehow.
They did. But having a table is just step one. You need surgical tools.
And this is where Lipes' ingenuity, and really the whole crew's ingenuity, just shines. They didn't have scalpels, they didn't have hemostats to clamp bleeding veins, they didn't have retractors.
Let's talk about the spoons, because that is the detail everyone remembers from this story.
Yeah, how do you use spoons in surgery?
Well, in a proper operating room, after the surgeon slices through the abdominal muscles, they need to pull those muscles apart to see inside the cavity.
You get to the appendix.
Exactly. Use a tool called a retractor. It is basically a bent piece of rigid stainless steel.
Which they obviously didn't have.
But they had the galley. They went into the kitchen, took regular tablespoons, and physically bent the handles back at a 90-degree angle.
So the bowl of the spoon hooks under the muscle and holds it back, and the bent handle is what the assistant holds onto.
Yes, an instant improvised retractor.
But what about the cutting part? You cannot use a butter knife for an appendectomy.
No, you need something razor sharp. They scrounged the boat for blades. The sources vary slightly here. Some say they used actual scalpel blades that were in the ship's first aid kit, but they just didn't have the handles to hold them properly.
And other sources say they just sharpened the galley knives.
Either way, they used whatever was sharpest, and then they had to sterilize everything.
How do you even do that? You don't have an autoclave on a submarine to steam sterilize instruments.
They used boiling water from the galley.
Yeah.
And for chemical sterilization, they used torpedo alcohol.
Torpedo alcohol.
Yes. The torpedoes on the Sargo-class submarines were powered by engines that burned a highly refined, high-proof alcohol. It's basically 180-proof grain alcohol.
The sailors called it torpedo juice.
They did. And sometimes they found ways to drink it, but in this specific case, it functioned as the perfect medical disinfectant.
So they're scrubbing down the spoons and knives with torpedo fuel. That is incredible. But what about the biggest hurdle of all? Anesthesia.
You have to knock Rector out. You cannot perform deep abdominal surgery on a conscious person.
They actually had ether on board, right?
They had ether. Ether is a liquid that easily turns into a gas. When a patient inhales it, they lose consciousness. But ether is incredibly tricky to administer.
Because if you give him too little, he wakes up screaming in the middle of the procedure.
And if you give him too much, his respiratory system shuts down and he dies.
Plus, you need a way to deliver it to his lungs.
Normally, an anesthesiologist uses a specialized mask. It looks like a little wire cage that fits snugly over the nose and mouth. You drape it with layers of gauze.
And then you drip the liquid ether onto the gauze so it vaporizes, and the patient breathes in the fumes.
But they didn't have that mask.
So Lipes looked around the galley again, and he saw a tea strainer.
A standard metal mesh tea strainer. The kind you use for loose-leaf tea.
He took that tea strainer, wrapped it in gauze bandage, and fit it right over Rector's nose and mouth. That is just brilliant problem solving.
It is engineering at its finest. It provided the exact perfect structure to hold the soaked gauze away from the skin, preventing chemical burns, while still allowing decent airflow.
But wait, ether is highly flammable, isn't it?
It is basically explosive. And think about where they are. A submarine is a metal tube filled with electrical sparks, running motors, open switches.
If the ether vapor concentration got too high in the air and someone just flipped a light switch,
the entire boat blows up. They were terrifyingly aware of this risk. They restricted all movement in the rest of the boat. No switches could be thrown. They tried to ventilate the wardroom as best they could while remaining completely submerged.
So, just picture this scene for a moment. You are in the officer's mess. It's tiny, it's sweltering. Lipes is wearing, did he even have surgical scrubs?
No scrubs. He wore pajama tops turned backward to simulate a sterile surgical gown. And he wore a makeshift mask made of medical gauze.
And his assistant?
His assistant was Norvell G. Ward. He was the communication officer, I believe. He was drafted to be the anesthesiologist. He was the guy sitting at Rector's head, carefully dripping the ether onto the tea strainer.
So Lipes steps up to the table, and he makes the first incision.
He cuts. He goes through the skin, the fat, the fascia layer. He separates the muscle fibers. He finally enters the abdominal cavity.
And does he find the appendix right away?
That is the surgeon's nightmare. In the medical textbooks, the appendix is beautifully drawn, always right in the same spot.
But in reality, bodies are messy, intestines move around.
Exactly. The appendix can be tucked behind the cecum. It can be adhered to the bowel wall from the inflammation. Lipes had to go hunting for it.
With his fingers?
With his gloved fingers, physically feeling around inside his friend's gut.
Can you imagine the sweat? The intense heat in that confined room?
And the absolute silence of the boat. The whole crew was holding their breath. And remember, they are still underwater. If a Japanese destroyer happens to pass overhead right at that moment and drops a depth charge,
The lights go out, the boat violently rocks, and the scalpel slips.
it is the highest stakes operation you can possibly imagine. But finally, Lipes finds it.
What condition was it in?
It was incredibly bad. It was black, gangrenous. It had severe adhesions, meaning it was stuck to the surrounding tissue. It was swollen huge.
So his diagnosis was completely right.
100% right. If they had waited even another few hours, that appendix would have burst.
So now he actually has to remove it.
He clamps it off. He likely used hemostats from the first aid kit, if they had a few, or maybe more improvised tools. He tightly ties off the base with catgut sutures, and he cuts the rotting organ free.
But you can't just leave a cut hole in the intestine.
No, you have to cauterize the stump. You have to perfectly seal the wound so intestinal bacteria doesn't leak out into the abdomen. He used phenol for that.
Phenol is an extremely harsh chemical.
It burns tissue instantly. He dipped a medical probe in phenol, applied it to the stump to burn it shut, and then quickly neutralized the burning acid with alcohol.
And then he has to stitch it up.
He inverted the stump back into the wall of the intestine, which is classic, proper surgical technique, and he stitched the outer wall shut over it.
He used a purse string suture, right?
Yes, it works exactly like drawing a drawstring bag closed.
Then he has to close the abdomen back up, layer by careful layer.
The muscle, then the fascia, and finally the skin.
And what about Rector?
They stop the ether drops. The anesthesia wears off.
And he wakes up.
He is actually alive.
He is groggy, he is in a lot of pain from the incision, but he is alive. And more importantly, the deadly source of the infection is completely gone.
Lipes really did it.
He performed a major abdominal surgery underwater in enemy territory with spoons and a tea strainer. It is nothing short of a miracle.
The rest of the crew must have just gone wild.
He was an absolute hero on that boat. Doc Lipes, the
Yeah.
man who cheated death. The morale boost was massive. But the Sea Dragon eventually has to end its patrol. They have to go home to port.
And this is exactly where the story takes a very sharp turn. We move into the aftermath.
You would naturally expect a ticker tape parade. You would expect the admiral to come down to the docks and shake his hand.
You would expect that, yes. But the Navy is a massive bureaucracy, and bureaucracies run entirely on rules and regulations.
So what was their actual reaction?
The Navy medical establishment was furious. The Surgeon General of the Navy was reportedly apoplectic over the whole thing.
But why? He saved a sailor's life.
Yes, but think about how he did it. He broke every single rule in the book. He performed a major surgery without a medical license. He risked the life of a sailor on a massive gamble.
But the gamble paid off. The guy lived.
To us looking back, yes. But to the admirals sitting at desks, it set a terrifying precedent. They were deeply afraid of what you might call the cowboy effect.
What does that mean?
They thought, if we pin a medal on Lipes' chest for this, every pharmacist mate in the entire Pacific Fleet is going to start trying to do brain surgery with a salad fork.
They wanted to discourage reckless improvisation.
They needed to maintain strict medical standards. They argued that Lipes was just incredibly lucky, not skilled. They said he recklessly endangered the patient. There was very serious talk of a court-martial.
A court-martial for saving a man's life.
They actually wanted to charge him with medical malpractice, maybe even assault.
That is just mind-blowing to me.
It is the ultimate clash of cultures. The frontline combat culture says, do absolutely whatever it takes to survive today. The rear echelon bureaucratic culture says, you must follow the established procedure.
So Lipes is standing there, probably expecting a pat on the back, and instead he is looking at going to the brig.
He was in real trouble.
Yeah.
But he had an ace in the hole. Or rather, the story itself had an ace in the hole.
Right, the secret got out. You cannot keep a story like that contained.
The crew of the Sea Dragon told everyone they met, and the civilian press got wind of it.
And the press definitely did not care about Navy regulations.
No, they saw a truly fantastic story. An American boy, using good old American ingenuity, saving his buddy with kitchen tools. It was the absolute perfect morale booster for a country that was weary from war.
A reporter named George Weller ended up writing the story.
Yes, on December 14th, 1942. He published it in the Chicago Daily News. The headline was something along the lines of "Pharmacist's Mate Performs Appendectomy in Submarine."
And it wasn't just a small local human interest piece.
It went completely viral, well, in the 1942 sense of the word. And get this detail. George Weller actually won the Pulitzer Prize for reporting in 1943, specifically for that article.
A Pulitzer Prize.
The highest possible honor in print journalism. So now, the Navy is in a massive bind. They really want to punish Lipes. But the entire country is celebrating him as a homegrown hero.
If they court-martial the subject of a Pulitzer Prize-winning story, they look like absolute monsters.
Exactly. The intense positive publicity literally saved him. They couldn't touch him after that.
And the pop culture phenomenon didn't stop with a newspaper article either?
No, Hollywood jumped on it almost immediately. In 1943, they released the movie Destination Tokyo.
Starring Cary Grant.
The biggest movie star in the world at the time. There's a very specific scene in that movie where a pharmacist's mate performs an appendectomy on a submarine. It is directly, openly ripped from Lipes' story.
So Lipes is probably sitting in a movie theater somewhere, watching Cary Grant's movie, seeing his own life play out on the big screen.
And then there was radio, Cavalcade of America. This was a hugely popular radio drama series back then. They did an entire episode called Pharmacist's Mate First Class. It aired in May 1943 on the NBC Red Network.
And the source material mentions Lipes actually appeared on that broadcast?
He did. The actor Michael O'Shea played the character based on him. But at the very end of the drama, they brought the real Wheeler Lipes onto the microphone to speak to the audience.
That is just surreal. He is technically in the doghouse with the highest Navy brass, but he is out doing celebrity guest spots on national NBC radio.
It perfectly shows the power of public opinion. The public loved him unconditionally. The Navy had to begrudgingly let the whole thing slide.
But they still didn't reward him.
No, they've dropped the court-martial talk, but they absolutely refused to give him a medal or an official commendation.
They just ignored his achievement entirely.
They froze him out. No recognition, no official well done, just total bureaucratic silence.
And yet, even years later, the story just kept coming back around.
In 1958, there was a television show called The Silent Service, which focused entirely on submarine stories. They did an episode called Operation Sea Dragon.
Who played him in that one?
Richard Deacon.
Wait, the tall, bald guy from the Dick Van Dyke Show?
The very same actor. Before he was famous for playing Mel Cooley, he was on screen playing Wheeler Lipes.
That is a hilarious piece of trivia. So Lipes becomes this enduring pop culture legend. But I want to pivot back to the patient for a moment. Darrell Dean Rector.
Yes. This brings us to a really tragic twist in the story.
Lipes saves him in September 1942. Rector recovers from the surgery. He goes back to his duties.
He was a very good sailor. He continued to fight in the Pacific Theater.
He eventually transferred off the Sea Dragon to another boat.
The USS Tang, SS-306.
And the Tang is a very famous submarine in naval history.
It was the most successful American submarine of the entire war, commanded by the legendary Dick O'Kane. It sank more enemy tonnage than any other boat. But in October 1944, during a nighttime surface attack in the Taiwan Strait,
What exactly happened?
the Tang fired its very last torpedo of the patrol. But the torpedo physically malfunctioned upon leaving the tube. It did what is called a circular run.
Meaning it's steering jammed.
Yes, it turned completely around in the water, came right back, and struck the Tang.
The sub sank itself with its own weapon.
It happens. It is a completely tragic mechanical failure. The Tang went down very fast. Most of the crew died in the explosion or drowned,
Including Rector.
including Darrell Dean Rector.
So he died just 2 years after the surgery.
Almost exactly 2 years later.
You know, a cynic, or maybe those angry Navy brass, might look at that and say, well, see, it didn't even matter. He died anyway.
I strongly, strongly disagree with that perspective.
I do too.
Lipes bought that young man 2 full years. 2 years of life. 2 years of seeing the sun, writing letters to his family, joking with his shipmates.
And when he died a clean death in combat.
Exactly. He didn't die screaming in a tiny bunk, slowly drowning in his own bodily infection. He died at his post, serving his country. That matters immensely. There's real dignity in that.
I agree completely. The surgery was absolutely worth the risk.
It unequivocally was.
So let's follow Lipes' journey. The war ends, Rector is gone. Lipes is this weird celebrity who the Navy still formally refuses to acknowledge. Does he just leave the service out of frustration?
No. And I think this speaks volumes about his character. He loved the Navy. He stayed in.
Did he stay as an enlisted pharmacist mate?
He advanced. He proved to the establishment that he wasn't just a lucky one-hit wonder. He was an incredibly competent, brilliant medical administrator. In 1951, he was officially commissioned as an officer in the Medical Service Corps.
So he went from enlisted Doc Lipes to Lieutenant Commander Lipes.
He really did. He served an entire full career until 1962. He saw the Navy completely transition from those old diesel boats to the modern nuclear power era.
And what did he do after he finally retired from the military?
He took all that administrative experience and went into civilian hospital administration. He eventually became the president of Memorial Medical Center in Corpus Christi, Texas. He retired from that in 1991.
So the guy who started his surgical career with bent spoons and a tea strainer ended up running a major modern hospital.
It validates everything he did, doesn't it? It proves he wasn't just some reckless kid breaking rules for fun. He had a genuine natural gift for medicine and for leadership. The Navy was very lucky to keep him.
But there was still that glaring hole in his service record, the missing medal for the Sea Dragon Patrol.
And that takes us to the final chapter, justice delayed.
Why did it take so long for them to finally make it right? We are talking about decades here.
It is the ultimate example of bureaucratic inertia. Once a formal decision is made at the top, meaning we are not giving this man a medal, it takes a massive amount of energy to reverse it. The personnel file just gets dusty, the people originally involved retire, or they die. It just sits there.
For over 60 years.
60 years. Lipes lived his whole adult life without it. He raised a family. He was married to Myrtle Peterson, who sadly passed away in 1997. She never got to see him recognized by his country.
That is just heartbreaking.
He later remarried a woman named Audrey. But stories like his, they don't really die. Historians kept writing articles about the Sea Dragon, submarine veterans kept talking about it at reunions, and finally, in the early 2000s, the pressure mounted.
Someone finally listened to reason.
The Navy Secretary, or the current powers that be, finally looked at the historical record and said, "This is ridiculous. This man is a hero, and we need to fix this."
So in 2005...
February 2005, they held a special ceremony at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina.
What was the scene like?
Lipes is 84 years old at this point. He is frail. He is in a wheelchair. He is surrounded by his family and current sailors who look up to his legacy.
And the Navy finally gives him the medal.
They awarded him the Navy Commendation Medal. It is not the Medal of Honor, but it is a highly respected official recognition. The citation specifically says it is for heroic achievement.
It must have felt like a massive weight lifting off his shoulders after all those years.
He gave a very short speech. He was incredibly humble about the whole thing. He basically told the crowd, "I just did what I had to do to save a shipmate."
But there's a very sad coda to this timeline.
The timing is tragic. Lipes was actively dying during that ceremony. He had terminal pancreatic cancer.
So he knew this was the end of his life.
He died just 2 months after receiving the medal, April 17th, 2005.
It's almost like he intentionally held on just to see that wrong righted.
I really think he did. He wanted that validation, not for his own ego, but for the principle of the thing, to have the institution finally admit that what he did in that wardroom was right.
He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, isn't he?
Yes, Section 64, resting among the nation's greatest heroes, exactly where he belongs.
You know, we have spent a long time today talking about the mechanics of submarines and improvised spoons and medical bureaucracy. But when you step back and look at the whole narrative, what is the big takeaway here for you?
For me, it is entirely about the intense tension between the rule book and the real world.
Can you unpack that a bit?
Well, the rule book is there for a very good reason. You don't want chaos in a military unit. You don't want untrained people casually doing surgery. The Navy was right, in a broad, general sense, to have those strict regulations in place.
Sure, you need structure.
But the real world is incredibly messy. The real world puts you in extreme situations the rulebook simply didn't anticipate. There is no page in the manual for an appendix bursting at 300 feet depth with enemy ships overhead and no doctor.
So when the manual fails, you have to write your own page.
Exactly. Lipes represents that vital spark of human agency. The rare ability to look at a regular soup spoon and see a life-saving medical retractor. The ability to look at a simple tea strainer and see an anesthesia mask.
It's that ultimate MacGyver spirit.
It is. But beyond the cleverness, it's about moral courage. It would have been so incredibly easy for Lipes to just shrug and say, "Sorry, Captain, not my job. The regulations explicitly say I can't do it."
And Richter would have died.
And Lipes would have been perfectly safe from any disciplinary action.
Sure.
He wouldn't have faced a court-martial. He would have just followed orders perfectly.
But he consciously chose the hard path.
He chose the human path. He put his friend's life above his own career safety.
And here's the final provocative thought I want to leave our listeners with today. Lipes eventually got his medal, right? But he got it because he had a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist writing about him. He had Cary Grant playing him in a Hollywood blockbuster.
He had massive cultural visibility.
But how many others didn't have that?
That is the truly haunting question. How many sailors or soldiers or nurses or just regular everyday people broke the rules to do the morally right thing, but there was no reporter there to capture it?
And instead of becoming heroes, they just got crushed by the bureaucracy.
How many personnel files are sitting in military archives right now, marked with insubordination or dereliction of duty, that are actually hidden stories of incredible, desperate heroism that we just don't understand?
It really makes you wonder. They say history is written by the victors, but it's also clearly written by the rule makers.
It certainly is. Wheeler Lipes managed to beat the rule makers, but it took him 63 years to do it.
Well, here is to Wheeler Lipes. And here is to looking at ordinary things differently.
Yes. You will never look at a tablespoon the same way again.
Absolutely not. Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. It has been an incredible journey through a piece of history I didn't know much about.
It was a pleasure to walk through the details with you.
To you listening, thanks for staying with us. Thanks for going deep into the story. Keep questioning the rules, keep looking for the hidden tea strainers in your own life, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Goodbye, everyone.